She wiped down tables in silence, ignored the stares, and never once corrected the sailors who treated her like she was invisible. They saw a quiet blonde waitress cleaning up after them. What they didn't see was the gold ring on her finger, the kind only given to operators who don't officially exist. When one of them grabbed her wrist as a joke, she moved with a precision that made the entire room go silent. Then the base commander walked in, saw her face, and did something no one expected. He saluted. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories like this, I'd be honored if you subscribed. What happened next would force her to break 3 years of silence and reveal a truth that could destroy everyone in that room. The anchor and chain sat just outside the main gate of Naval Station Norfolk, a place where sailors came to forget the weight of their uniforms and pretend, for a few hours, that rank and discipline didn't matter. The bar was dimly lit, all scarred wood and flickering neon signs advertising beers nobody really liked. Friday night at 2100 hours meant the place was packed wall to wall, with bodies fresh off a brutal training cycle, voices competing to be heard over the jukebox bleeding classic rock into the smoky air. Behind the bar, a pair of hands moved with quiet efficiency. They wiped down glass after glass, each motion controlled and deliberate, no wasted energy. The hands belonged to a woman in her early 30s, blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a faded denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her name tag, pinned slightly crooked above her heart, read simply, Wren. No last name, just Wren. She navigated the chaos like water flowing around stones, carrying trays of drinks to tables without ever seeming to rush. When someone shouted for another round, she already had it poured. When a sailor tried to flag her down, she was already heading his direction. There was a rhythm to the way she worked, something almost mechanical in its precision, as if she'd mapped every square foot of the room and calculated the most efficient path through it. The sailors barely noticed her. To them, she was part of the furniture, another civilian hired to clean up their messes and smile politely, while they made jokes she wasn't supposed to hear. She kept her eyes down, her responses short, and never lingered at any table longer than necessary. That only seemed to make some of them push harder, testing to see if they could get a reaction. Near the dartboard, a glass shattered against the floor. The sudden crack of breaking glass made half the room jump, a reflexive flinch born from too many nights in too many dangerous places. But Wren didn't even pause. She just kept moving, kept pouring, kept working. It was such a small thing, that lack of reaction, that most people didn't even register it. But one person did. Petty Officer Jessup sat in a booth near the back, nursing a beer and wasn't really drinking. He was older than most of the sailors here, pushing 40, with the kind of weathered face that came from seeing things you couldn't unsee. He'd been watching Wren for the past 20 minutes, not in the way some of the younger guys watched her, but with a different kind of attention, the way she moved, the way she never showed her back to the door, the way her eyes swept the room in regular intervals, cataloging faces and exits. That wasn't how civilians moved. Ensign Calloway, fresh-faced and eager to impress, leaned over the bar as Wren set down his drink. He flashed what he probably thought was a charming smile. "You know, you'd be prettier if you smiled more." Wren paused, just for a heartbeat. Her hand hovered over the tap, and something flickered across her face, too quick to name. Then she smiled, and it was the most polite, empty, professional expression Calloway had ever seen. "You want a lime with that?" Calloway laughed, louder than the joke deserved, and his buddies joined in because that's what you did when the golden boy made a joke. But Jessup kept watching as Wren walked away, and he saw something in the way she held herself that made his instincts prickle. He'd seen that kind of control before, in people who'd been trained to hide what they were feeling, in people who'd learned to be invisible. 30 minutes later, the noise level had climbed from loud to deafening. A group of 6 sailors had claimed the corner booth, and they were the kind of group that drew attention whether they wanted it or not. At the center sat Lieutenant Junior Grade Brecken Thorne, a special warfare combatant craft crewman with the kind of confidence that came from being good at what he did and knowing everyone knew it. He had the build of someone who spent serious time in the gym, close-cropped hair, and a smile that could turn mean without warning. His buddies orbited him like planets around a sun, feeding off his energy, laughing at his jokes before he finished telling them. When Wren brought their 4th round of drinks, Thorne didn't even look up at first. He was in the middle of a story about some training exercise that had gone sideways, gesturing with his hands while his audience ate it up. She set down the tray and turned to leave. Hey, hold on. Ren stopped. Didn't turn around, just stopped. Thorne finally looked at her, and his grin widened. You ever think about joining up? Navy could use more support staff. The table erupted in laughter. Petty Officer Gann, sitting to Thorne's left, nearly choked on his beer. One of the younger sailors pulled out his phone, sensing something worth recording. Ren's voice was calm, almost pleasant. I'll keep that in mind. Thorne leaned back in his seat, enjoying the attention. I'm serious. You got the look. Quiet type. Follow orders. That's what they want, right? Someone who doesn't ask questions. She didn't respond, just held his gaze for a beat longer than most people would have been comfortable with. There was something in her eyes, something still and measuring, but Thorne was too caught up in his performance to notice. Gann tried to wave him off. Dude, leave her alone. She's just here to clean up after us. Thorne's smile took on an edge. Yeah, that's exactly my point. He reached out, casual as anything, and grabbed her wrist as she tried to walk away. His grip wasn't hard, not quite, but it was firm enough to stop her movement. The bar seemed to hold its breath for a split second, that moment when everyone senses something about to happen, but hasn't processed what it is yet. Hold up. Let me show you something. You ever throw a punch? The laughter got louder. Someone near the back whistled. The phones came out now, multiple sailors capturing what they thought would be a funny story to share later. Ren's voice stayed quiet. Let go. Thorne grinned wider. Come on, I'm just messing with you. Here, I'll teach you how a real sailor does it. She moved. It happened in 2 seconds, maybe less. Ren rotated her wrist inward with a precision that spoke of countless repetitions, breaking Thorne's grip with a technique so smooth it looked effortless. Before he could process what was happening, she'd used his own momentum against him, twisting his arm behind his back in a controlled arc that gave him no choice but to follow. She guided him down, not violently but with absolute mechanical efficiency, until his knees hit the floor and his face was pressed against the table. The bar went silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes from shock or surprise. It was deeper than that. The kind of silence that falls when everyone in a room realizes simultaneously that they've completely misread a situation. Thorne's buddies sat frozen, phones still recording, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion to something that might have been fear. Ren released him and stepped back, her movements still controlled, still economical. She adjusted her sleeve, a simple gesture to straighten fabric that had ridden up during the brief altercation. That's when Jessup saw it. On her left hand, on her ring finger, there was a band of gold. Not a wedding ring, not jewelry. It was thicker than that, more substantial, with an engraving that caught the light as her sleeve fell back into place. Even from across the room, even in the dim bar lighting, Jessup recognized what he was seeing. A trident. The seal trident. But not the one you earned in Bud S. This was different. This was the kind of ring that didn't show up in any official records. The kind issued to operators in units that technically didn't exist. Jessup's face went white. His beer slipped from nerveless fingers and hit the table with a dull thunk. Oh my God. The words came out barely above a whisper, but in the silence they carried. A few heads turned his direction. Thorne was still on his knees, one hand rubbing his wrist, his face a mixture of humiliation and dawning realization that something had gone very, very wrong. The front door swung open. Captain Idris Hale walked into the bar like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He was in his late 50s, with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had seen too many years and too many decisions that kept him up at night. He wore his uniform with the weary precision of someone who'd been wearing it so long it had become a second skin. He was here for a routine check with Shore Patrol, just wanted to grab a coffee and head home to try and get 4 hours of sleep before the next crisis. Then he saw the commotion, saw the circle of sailors, saw the woman standing in the center, saw the ring on her hand. His eyes traveled up from the ring to her face, and every muscle in his body went rigid. The color drained from his features. His lips moved, forming a name without sound at first, as if his brain was processing something his mouth couldn't quite accept. Ren. The name came out rough, barely audible. He tried again, louder this time, and there was something in his voice that made everyone in the bar turn to look. Not just curiosity. recognition. Wait, Ren Castellan. The way he said it made it clear this wasn't just a name, it was a designation, a call sign, something that carried history and meaning that went far beyond the simple syllables. Captain Hale straightened. It wasn't a conscious decision. His body simply snapped to attention, decades of training overriding every other impulse. And then, without hesitation, without explanation, he brought his hand up in a full formal salute. The bar might as well have been a photograph. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Thorne was still on his knees, staring up at the scene with his mouth slightly open. Calloway looked like he was going to be sick. Even the bartender had stopped mid-pour, whiskey spilling unnoticed onto the counter. Ren stood perfectly still. For a long moment she didn't react at all, just held Hale's gaze with those same measuring eyes. Then, so subtle most people would have missed it, she gave a single nod, nothing more than a slight inclination of her head. Hale lowered his salute but didn't relax. "I didn't know you were here." Ren's voice was quiet, but it carried in the silence. That was the idea. How long? 8 months. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. Jessup was frantically pulling out his phone now, fingers shaking as he tried to search for something. Calloway had gone from looking sick to looking terrified. The younger sailors were glancing at each other, trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate prank. But the look on Captain Hale's face made it clear this was anything but a joke. Hale turned to face the group of sailors, and when he spoke his voice had gone cold and clipped, the tone of a commander who was barely holding back fury. "Does anyone here know what a gold trident ring means?" Silence. A few people shook their heads. Most just stared. It means the person wearing it was part of a unit that doesn't exist in any official record. It means they've done things you will never be cleared to know about. He paused, letting that sink in, watching the realization spread across their faces like a slow-moving wave. It means you just assaulted a decorated combat veteran whose kill count is classified at the highest level. Thorne tried to speak, his voice cracking. "I didn't know. She's just a waitress." Hale's expression could have frozen steel. "She's Lieutenant Commander Ren Castellan, call sign Revenant, Dev Gru, JSOC, 3 tours in Yemen, 2 in Syria." The name hit like a physical blow. Jessup's phone slipped from his hand and clattered on the table. Gann was whispering something under his breath that might have been a prayer. The sailor who'd been recording slowly lowered his phone, his face slack with shock. Hale wasn't done. She was declared KIA in 2022 after Operation Tidebreak. Calloway found his voice, thin and wavering. "But she's standing right here." Hale's response was a single word, heavy with implications nobody in that room could fully grasp. "Exactly." He turned back to Ren, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, urgent and almost pleading. "You shouldn't be here. You know that, right?" Ren met his eyes steadily. "I know. Does Command know you're here?" She didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Hale's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He glanced at the sailors, at the phones, at the dozens of witnesses who would be talking about this within minutes. "We need to talk. Privately. Now. Not yet." "Ren, this isn't optional." I said not yet. There was no heat in her voice, no anger, but there was something absolutely final about it. Hale held her gaze for another few seconds, and whatever he saw there made him take a step back. Ren walked past him, past the staring sailors, past the phone still recording, past Thorne, who was finally climbing to his feet with his face burning red. She moved through the bar like she'd moved through it all night, with that same economical grace, and pushed through the front door into the night. For a long moment after she left, nobody moved. The bar felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to explain what had just happened, to make sense of the impossible thing they'd just witnessed. Jessup was the first to find words, and they came out shaky and disbelieving. "We just grabbed a SEAL operator. Calloway looked like he might pass out. We're so screwed." Thorne sat back down heavily, his hand still rubbing his wrist. He wasn't looking at anyone, just staring at the table where his face had been pressed moments before. The bravado had evaporated, replaced by something that looked like genuine fear. Gann pulled out his phone again, and his eyes went wide as he scrolled. "Guys, the video. It's already uploading. I didn't even hit post. It's just going." Jessup grabbed his arm. "Delete it. Are you insane? This is going to be huge." Jessup's grip tightened. Delete it right now. But even as he said it, he knew it was too late. He could see other phones out, other sailors checking their uploads, the video already starting to spread like wildfire through social media. Within minutes, it would be everywhere. Within an hour, millions of people would be watching Lieutenant Junior Grade, Breckenthorne, get dropped to his knees by a woman he'd thought was just a bartender. Captain Hale stood near the door, his command presence having evaporated into something that looked almost like exhaustion. He pulled out his phone and made a call, his voice too low for anyone to hear clearly. When he hung up, he turned back to face the room. If I find out any of you have spoken to the media, to anyone outside this base, about what you just saw, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your careers scrubbing bilges in the most remote posting I can find. Is that understood? A chorus of yes sirs echoed back, but they sounded hollow. Everyone knew that the damage was already done. The videos were out there. The story was spreading. Captain Hale left without another word. Outside, Wren walked across the parking lot. The night air was cool against her skin, a relief after the stuffiness of the bar. She moved with the same controlled pace, not hurrying, not looking back. Just walking like she had somewhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. She reached a beat-up sedan parked in the far corner, away from the lights. As she unlocked the door, she paused and looked down at her left hand. The ring caught the distant glow from the base, the Trident engraving clearly visible now that nobody was watching. She'd worn it every single day for 8 months, had served drinks to hundreds of sailors, some of whom should have recognized what it meant. But nobody ever looked closely at the help. Nobody ever really saw the people who cleaned up after them. That had been the point. Inside the car, she pulled out a laptop from under the passenger seat and opened it on her lap. The screen glowed in the darkness as she navigated through encrypted folders, past layers of security that would have taken most people months to crack. She'd built this file system herself, adding to it piece by piece over the past 8 months. Mission logs, personnel records, financial transactions, communications intercepts, every piece of data she could gather, legally or otherwise, about the 6 people who died in Yemen 3 years ago, about the mission that had gone wrong, about the ambush that shouldn't have been possible. Someone had sold them out. Someone had taken money to give their enemies everything they needed: route, timing, personnel, everything. 6 operators had died in that ambush, 6 of the best people Wren had ever served with. And she'd survived only because she'd disobeyed a direct order and gone dark 30 seconds before the attack. For 3 years, she'd been hunting the person responsible. For 8 months, she'd been working in that bar, watching, listening, gathering evidence. And she'd finally narrowed it down to 3 suspects. 3 people who'd had access to the mission details. 3 people stationed at Norfolk. One of them had walked into that bar tonight. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text message was short and to the point. "I know why you're here. You're getting close. Be careful." Wren stared at the message for a long moment. Then she deleted it without responding. Whoever had sent it knew she was investigating, which meant she was either very close to the truth or she'd already been compromised. She closed the laptop and started the engine. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she didn't look back at the bar, at the base, at any of it. She just drove, heading for the cheap motel 2 miles away, where she'd been staying for the past 8 months. Behind her, the bar was still buzzing with shocked conversation. The videos were spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 2 hours, Navy SEALs mocked her as a waitress would be trending on multiple platforms. Within 4 hours, it would have 4 million views. But Wren didn't care about the views or the attention. She cared about the message on her phone. She cared about the fact that someone was watching her. And she cared about the list of 3 names on her laptop, one of which belonged to a traitor. Tomorrow morning, everything would change. The viral video would force hands, expose positions, make people reveal themselves. And in the chaos, maybe she'd finally get the answer she'd been looking for. Maybe she'd finally find out who had killed her team. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been underestimated, drop a comment below and let me know your story. And if you want to see how this ends, make sure you're subscribed because part 2 is coming soon. The real hunt is just beginning. The morning after the video went viral, the base felt different. Wren could sense it the moment she drove through the main gate at 600 hours. The guards at the checkpoint stared a beat too long. A group of sailors waiting for morning muster turned their heads as she passed. Word had spread faster than wildfire, and now everyone knew what she was. Or at least, they thought they did. She parked her sedan in the visitor lot and walked toward the Anchor and Chain. The bar wouldn't open for another 8 hours, but she still had a shift scheduled, and she intended to show up. Routines mattered. They kept you grounded when everything else was spinning out of control. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop since 0400. Texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Calls that went straight to voicemail. She'd turned off notifications after the first 100, but she could still feel the weight of attention pressing down on her like a physical thing. The video had hit 4.2 million views overnight. It was on TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram. Someone had even made a reaction compilation. The title varied depending on the platform, but the core was always the same. Navy SEALs mocked her as a waitress. Then the commander saluted. Wren had watched it once, just to see what everyone else was seeing. The angle was from Thorne's buddy's phone, shaky and poorly lit, but clear enough. You could see the grab, the takedown, the ring, Captain Hale's salute, and you could see her face, calm and expressionless through all of it. The comments section was a war zone. Half the people were calling her a hero. The other half were questioning whether the video was staged. A smaller but vocal group was demanding to know why a combat veteran was working as a bartender. That question was getting traction in places that made Wren's instincts prickle. Inside his quarters 3 blocks away, Petty Officer Jessup sat at his desk with his laptop open, studying a screenshot he'd taken from the video. He'd been up all night, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about what he'd seen. He'd paused the video at the exact moment Wren's sleeve had ridden up, zoomed in until the image pixelated, and there it was, the ring. But that wasn't what held his attention now. It was the background. In the reflection of the bar mirror, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, there was a figure sitting alone in the far corner booth. Civilian clothes, dark jacket. Watching the entire scene unfold with an expression that didn't match anyone else in the room. While everyone else had been shocked or amused or confused, this person had been smiling. Not the smile of someone enjoying a show. The smile of someone watching a plan come together. Jessup had enhanced the image as much as his limited software would allow, and now he could make out a detail that made his stomach clench. On the figure's jacket, just visible at the shoulder, was a patch. Small, black, a stylized scorpion. He knew that symbol. Every sailor who'd spent time in the Middle East knew it, even if they never talked about it openly. Greystone Tactical. A private military contractor with connections that went deep into places most people didn't want to think about. Jessup saved the image to an encrypted folder and closed his laptop. He needed to talk to someone, but he wasn't sure who. Captain Hale would be the obvious choice, but something about the way Hale had reacted last night made Jessup hesitate. The captain had been surprised, yes, but there'd been something else underneath, something that looked almost like fear. Across the base in the NCIS field office, Special Agent Talia Mercer sat in a briefing room with 3 other agents, all of them staring at a projection of the viral video frozen on the wall. Mercer was in her early 40s, with sharp features and the kind of intense focus that made junior agents nervous. She'd been with NCIS for 16 years, and she'd learned to trust her instincts when something didn't add up. And this definitely didn't add up. The woman in the video, Lieutenant Commander Wren Castellan, was officially dead, killed in action during Operation Tidebreak in Yemen, 2022. Mercer had pulled the file that morning, or what little of it was available. Most of the details were redacted, classified at levels that required clearance Mercer didn't have. But the conclusion was clear: hostile engagement, no remains recovered, presumed KIA. Yet here she was, very much alive, working as a bartender on a naval base. Why? That was the question that had kept Mercer up half the night. Why would a decorated SEAL operator fake her death and then resurface in the most public way possible? Why work at a bar on a military base where any number of people might recognize her? Why blow her own cover, unless she hadn't meant to blow it, unless something had forced her hand? Mercer's phone buzzed, a text from her supervisor. Conference call in 10. DOD wants answers. Of course they did. A dead operator coming back to life on social media was the kind of nightmare that made Pentagon lawyers wake up in cold sweats. Mercer closed the file and headed for her office. She had a feeling this investigation was going to get complicated fast. Ren reached the anchor and chain just as the sun cleared the horizon. The parking lot was empty except for the owner's truck, and the building looked smaller somehow in the daylight, less imposing. She used her key to let herself in through the back entrance and found herself standing in the narrow hallway that led to the main room. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing in the smell of stale beer and old wood. This place had been her cover for 8 months, her camouflage, and now that camouflage was burned beyond repair, she walked into the main room and stopped. Someone had been here. Nothing looked disturbed. The chairs were still stacked on tables. The bar was still clean. But Ren could feel it, that subtle wrongness that came from years of training. Someone had moved through this space recently, and they'd been careful about it. She moved to the corner booth where the man with the graystone patch had been sitting, ran her hand along the underside of the table. Her fingers found it immediately, a small device, no bigger than a quarter, magnetic backing holding it in place, a listening device, military grade. Ren's face remained calm, but inside her mind was racing through implications. This wasn't new. Based on the dust pattern around it, this had been here for weeks, maybe longer. Someone had been monitoring this bar, monitoring her. She left the device in place and pulled out her phone, took a photo of the serial number stamped on its side. Then she walked to the back office and sat down at the ancient desktop computer the owner used for inventory. It took her 4 minutes to route through enough proxy servers to feel secure, and another 6 to access the encrypted messaging system she'd set up months ago. She typed out a message to a contact she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Cade, need a favor, sending image, need manufacturer and purchase records for listening device, military grade, urgent. The response came back faster than she'd expected. Single word, Revenant, the old call sign. Seeing it typed out made something twist in her chest. She pushed the feeling aside and typed back. Someone tried to kill me 3 nights ago. Same pattern as Yemen. Need to know who's pulling strings. The pause was longer this time. When Cade's response came through, she could almost hear his voice, rough and cautious. You think it's connected? Ren's fingers didn't hesitate. I know it is. Another pause. Then a longer message. Send serial number. We'll run it. But if this goes where I think it's going, you need to be ready for the answer. Some doors don't close once you open them. Ren sent the image and logged off. She sat back in the creaky office chair and stared at the wall. On it hung a faded photograph of the bar's opening day, 20 years ago. Different people, different world, simpler times. Her phone buzzed again. Different number, local, unknown sender, Pier 7, 2200 hours. Come alone. Ren read it twice, then deleted it. She memorized the details anyway. Pier 7 was on the far side of the base, an old loading dock that hadn't been used in years. Isolated, no cameras, the kind of place you chose when you didn't want witnesses. She checked the time. 14 hours until the meeting, more than enough time to prepare. By midday, the video had crossed 10 million views. It was being picked up by news outlets now, not just social media. Military blogs were running analysis pieces. Veterans were weighing in. Some praised her, some questioned the authenticity. A few were digging into Operation Tidebreak, trying to piece together what had really happened in Yemen. That last group worried Ren the most. She spent the afternoon at her motel room, going through her files with fresh eyes. If someone had been listening to the bar for weeks, they knew she'd been investigating. They knew she was close, which meant they also knew she'd narrowed her list of suspects. 3 names. 3 people who had had access to the mission parameters for Operation Tidebreak. 3 people who could have sold that information to the enemy. Lieutenant Commander Paxton Oakes, logistics officer. He'd been her CO during the mission, the one who'd approved the extraction route. He'd survived the ambush with minor injuries and been promoted 6 months later. Commander Sienna Vex, intelligence liaison. She'd provided the threat assessment that cleared the road as low risk. After the mission fell apart, she'd been transferred stateside and now worked at JSOC headquarters. Captain Idris Hale, base commander at Norfolk. He hadn't been directly involved in Operation Tidebreak, but he'd been the one who signed off on the final authorization. And he'd been the one who declared Ren KIA when she went dark. 3 suspects, 1 traitor. Ren had been systematically eliminating possibilities for 8 months, following money trails, tracking communications, building timelines, and she'd found something. A pattern of financial transactions, small amounts spread across multiple accounts, all leading back to a shell company with ties to Greystone Tactical. She just hadn't been able to prove which of the three was behind it until now, because someone had panicked, someone had sent a sniper, someone had been careless enough to leave a listening device she could trace. At 2100 hours, Ren left the motel. She wore dark clothes, practical boots, and carried nothing that would make noise. The ring stayed on her finger. She'd thought about taking it off, but it felt wrong somehow. Like removing it would be admitting defeat. The drive to Pier 7 took 15 minutes. She parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, using the shadows between buildings to stay invisible. Old habits. They'd kept her alive this long. The pier was exactly as isolated as she'd expected. Wooden planks stretching out over black water, lit only by distant streetlights and the ambient glow from the base. She could hear water lapping against the pilings, the creak of old wood settling. She arrived 20 minutes early and found a position with clear sightlines in 3 directions. Then she waited. At exactly 2200 hours, footsteps echoed across the pier, measured, unhurried. A figure emerged from the darkness, and even before she could make out the face, Ren recognized the bearing. Captain Idris Hale. He stopped 10 feet away, hands visible, empty. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The water continued its rhythmic motion below them, indifferent to human drama. "You shouldn't have come." Ren's voice was quiet, but carried clearly. Hale's face was drawn, older than it had looked the night before. "Neither should you. NCIS is already asking questions. That video made you a target. Good." The single word seemed to hit Hale like a physical blow. He took a step closer. "Good? You think this is good? Ren, if they find out you're running an unsanctioned investigation into a classified operation, they'll bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again. They already know." Hale stopped. Someone tipped them off. 2 days ago, right after I identified my final suspect. Ren watched his face carefully. The micro expressions, the tiny tells that separated truth from deception. Who? You. The accusation hung between them like smoke. Hale's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "You think I sold out your team?" "No." Ren's voice was absolutely certain. "But I think you're protecting someone who did. That's insane. Then why did you salute me in front of 30 witnesses? You blew my cover. Either you're incompetent or you were sending a message." Hale's composure cracked slightly. He ran a hand through his gray hair, and for a moment he looked every one of his 50-plus years. The message wasn't for them. It was for you. Ren waited. "You need to leave. Tonight. Pack your things and disappear, because if you don't, the person you're looking for is going to kill you. Let them try." Hale stepped closer, and there was genuine fear in his eyes now. "You don't understand. This isn't just about Yemen anymore. This is bigger. The people involved, they have resources you can't imagine. They have reach. They will erase you, and nobody will ever find the body. Who is it, Idris?" Ren's voice was steady. "Who's dirty?" Hale hesitated. That single moment of uncertainty told Ren everything she needed to know. He suspected someone, maybe even knew, but he was afraid to say the name out loud. "I don't know for certain." His voice was barely above a whisper. "But I know they're connected to Greystone Tactical, and I know they've been tracking you for weeks." A red laser dot appeared on Ren's chest. The world seemed to slow down. Ren saw Hale's eyes widen, saw his mouth open to shout a warning, saw him start to move toward her. But her body was already reacting, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. She dropped and rolled left in the same motion, coming up in a crouch behind a support piling. The sharp crack of a gunshot split the night air, and splinters exploded from the railing exactly where she'd been standing. Sniper. The analysis was automatic, suppressed. 300 Win Mag based on the sound. 400 meters out, northeast quadrant. Hale had thrown himself flat on the pier, hands over his head. Ren was already moving, staying low, using the pilings for cover. She pulled out her phone with one hand and thumbed a preset number. Shore Patrol. Active shooter on base. Pier 7. Single sniper. Elevated position. northeast of my location. She ended the call before anyone could respond. Another shot cracked past her, this one closer. The shooter was adjusting, tracking her movement. Professional work. Expensive work. Ren's mind raced through options. She was unarmed, in the open, against a trained marksman with the high ground. In a fair fight, she'd be dead in 30 seconds. So, she wouldn't fight fair. She pulled off her jacket and tossed it to her right. The sniper took the bait. A third shot punched through the fabric as it flew through the air. That gave Ren the split second she needed to break left, sprinting for the edge of the pier. She dove off the edge just as a fourth shot splintered the wood where her feet had been. The water was shockingly cold, closing over her head, muffling all sound. She swam hard, staying deep, letting the current carry her away from the pier. When she surfaced 30 seconds later, she was 50 yards downstream, hidden in the shadow of a cargo container. She could hear sirens in the distance, shore patrol responding. The shooter would be gone already. Professionals didn't stick around when the situation went loud. She hauled herself out of the water and crouched in the darkness, dripping and shivering, but alive. Her mind was already dissecting what had just happened, the timing, the placement, the precision. Someone had known she'd be at that pier. Someone had set this up. Either they'd been listening to her communications, or someone she'd been in contact with had told them. Or Hale had. But if Hale had wanted her dead, he could have killed her himself. Could have set up the meeting somewhere more isolated, more controlled. Unless he'd needed witnesses. Unless he'd needed it to look like an outside attack. Too many variables. Too many unknowns. Ren pulled out her phone. The waterproof case had held. One new message, received 5 minutes ago while she'd been underwater. From Cade. Got your trace. Device registered to Lieutenant Commander Paxton Oakes. Logistics, Norfolk Station. And there's more. Financial records show regular payments from a Greystone subsidiary. Started 3 months before Yemen. Still active. Ren stared at the screen. The name wasn't a surprise. Oakes had been at the top of her list. But having confirmation, having proof, changed everything. Paxton Oakes had been her commanding officer. The man who'd given the orders during Operation Tidebreak. The man who'd approved the extraction route. The man who'd been in the Tactical Operations Center when her team walked into an ambush. The man who'd let 6 operators die for money. A second message came through from Cade. One more thing. Oakes put in a request for access to NCIS investigation files this morning. He's looking for you, and he knows you're looking for him. Ren deleted both messages and powered off her phone. She needed to move. Shore Patrol would be sweeping this area soon, and she couldn't afford to be found. Not yet. Not until she'd finished this. She made her way back to her car using a route that kept her away from main roads and security cameras. By the time she reached the motel, it was past midnight, and her clothes were still damp from the river. Inside her room, she changed into dry clothes and spread her laptop across the bed. Pulled up everything she had on Paxton Oakes. Service record, financial data, communication logs, travel records, building a profile, looking for patterns. And there it was. Oakes had been at Norfolk the entire 8 months Ren had been working at the bar. Not deployed, not transferred, just here. Close enough to monitor her. Close enough to know when she was getting too close to the truth. He'd been playing a waiting game, letting her investigate, letting her gather evidence, probably planning to eliminate her quietly before she could do anything with what she'd found. But the viral video had changed the equation. Now she had attention, protection through visibility. He couldn't make her disappear without raising questions. So he'd tried to kill her publicly. Make it look like an outside attack. A random targeting by enemies she'd made overseas, clean and plausible. Except he'd failed. Ren checked the time. 01:30 hours. In 6.5 hours, the base commissary would open. Public space. Lots of witnesses. Cameras. Everywhere. The kind of place where an accusation couldn't be ignored or buried. She started planning. At A600 hours, Jessup walked into the NCIS field office without an appointment. The agent at the front desk tried to turn him away, but Jessup pulled out his phone and showed him the screenshot. The figure in the mirror, the Greystone patch. The agent's expression changed. He picked up a phone, spoke quietly, then gestured for Jessup to wait. 10 minutes later, Special Agent Mercer appeared. She took one look at the image and her face went very still. "Come with me." In the briefing room, Jessup explained everything. The video, the reflection, the patch. Mercer listened without interrupting, and when he was finished, she pulled up a file on her laptop. This man. She turned the screen to show Jessup a surveillance photo. "Is this who you saw in the mirror?" Jessup studied it. The angle was different, but the build was right, the posture. "Yeah, that's him. His name is Marcus Teague, former Marine Raider, dishonorably discharged for conduct violations in 2019. He's been working as a contractor for Greystone ever since." Mercer's voice was flat. "We've been tracking him in connection with several incidents overseas, arms trafficking, intelligence leaks, 2 suspected assassinations. What was he doing at a Navy bar in Norfolk? That's what I intend to find out." Mercer closed the laptop. "You did the right thing bringing this to me, petty officer. But from here on, this is an NCIS investigation. You don't talk to anyone about what you saw. You don't post anything online." "Understood." Jessup nodded. "What about Lieutenant Commander Castellan? Is she safe?" Mercer's expression was unreadable. "I don't know." At 0730 hours, Wren walked into the base commissary. She'd showered, changed into clean clothes, and pinned her hair back. The ring was visible on her left hand, catching the fluorescent lights. The commissary was crowded with the morning rush. Sailors grabbing breakfast before duty. Families shopping for groceries. The normal rhythm of base life continuing, despite the chaos of the past 24 hours. Wren spotted Oakes immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, eating eggs and toast, reading something on his tablet. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like a man who had nothing to hide. She walked straight toward him. Conversations died as she passed. People recognized her from the video. Some pulled out phones, others just stared. By the time she reached Oakes's table, half the commissary was watching. "Hello, Paxton." Oakes looked up. His expression was pleasant, mildly curious. "Nothing more?" "Wren, heard you've been making quite the scene lately. You sold us out." The accusation was delivered in a conversational tone, but it carried through the sudden silence like a gunshot. Oakes set down his fork carefully. "That's a serious accusation. You took money from Greystone Tactical. You gave them our extraction route in Yemen. You let them set up an ambush. 6 operators died because you wanted a payday." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones were definitely recording now. Oakes glanced around, registered the audience, and his pleasant expression never wavered. "You have no proof." Wren pulled a folded paper from her pocket and dropped it on the table. "Bank transfers, the listening device you planted in the bar, the sniper you hired 3 nights ago. His real name is Marcus Teague, by the way. NCIS picked him up 2 hours ago. He's talking. It was a bluff." Wren had no idea if NCIS had found Teague, but she watched Oakes's face carefully, looking for the tell. There it was, a tiny tightening around his eyes, a fractional hesitation before he spoke. "You're supposed to be dead." The words came out quietly, but in the silence they were perfectly audible. Several people gasped. Someone dropped a coffee cup. "I know." Wren's voice was steady. "That's the only reason you got sloppy." Oakes stood slowly. "Even if you're right, even if any of this is true, you think anyone's going to believe you? You're a ghost. Officially KIA. You don't exist in any system anywhere. I don't need them to believe me." Wren turned toward the entrance. Captain Hale stood there with 2 NCIS agents, Special Agent Mercer among them. Lieutenant Commander Paxton Oakes. Hale's voice carried military authority and something darker underneath. Barely controlled rage. "You're under arrest for treason, conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to the deaths of 6 Navy SEALs, and attempted murder of a federal witness." Oakes's pleasant mask shattered. His hand moved toward his waistband. Wren was faster. She moved with the same controlled precision she'd shown in the bar, closing the distance before Oakes could draw whatever weapon he was reaching for. One strike to disarm, a sweep to take his legs out. A controlled descent that put him face down on the commissary floor, with his arm twisted behind his back. The entire sequence took maybe 3 seconds. The NCIS agents moved in with handcuffs. Mercer read Oakes his rights while he struggled and swore. The commissary erupted in shocked conversation, but Wren was already walking away. She made it to the exit before Hale caught up with her. That was reckless. That was necessary. Hale studied her face. You could have been killed, but I wasn't. They stood there for a moment, two veterans who'd both seen too much and couldn't talk about any of it. Finally, Hale sighed. NCIS wants to debrief you, officially. They're talking about reinstatement, full rank, full honors. You'd be a hero. I'm not a hero. Ren's voice was tired. I'm just someone who didn't die when I was supposed to. So, what now? You keep pouring drinks? Maybe, or maybe I keep doing what I've always done. Stay quiet, stay invisible, make sure the people who think they're untouchable aren't. Hale almost smiled. You know you could have asked for help. You didn't have to do this alone. Yes, I did. She walked out into the morning sun. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand up alone when no one else would, share your thoughts in the comments. And stay tuned for the final part, because justice has been served, but some questions still remain. Make sure you're here for it. 1 week after Paxton Oaks was taken into custody, the Anchor and Chain reopened for business. The owner had considered keeping it closed longer, milking the publicity, but Ren had convinced him otherwise. Normal was what she needed. Normal was the only thing that made sense anymore. Friday night, 2100 hours. The bar was packed, but the energy was different from before. People still came to drink and forget, but now they came for another reason too. They came to see her. Ren moved through the crowd with the same economical grace she'd always had, carrying trays of drinks, wiping down tables, keeping her responses brief and professional. But now, when she passed, conversation stopped. People watched, some with respect, some with curiosity, a few with something that looked almost like reverence. She hated it. The attention felt like a weight pressing down on her shoulders, making it harder to breathe. For 8 months she'd been invisible, and invisibility had been armor. Now that armor was gone, and she felt exposed in ways that had nothing to do with physical danger. Near the back booth, the same booth where everything had started, sat 3 familiar faces: Thorne, Calloway, and Gann. They'd come in separately over the past hour, each one ordering a drink and nursing it slowly, clearly working up the courage for something. Finally, Thorne stood, walked to the bar, waited until Ren finished serving another customer. Can I talk to you? Ren looked at him, really looked, seeing past the surface to the genuine discomfort underneath. She nodded toward the far end of the bar, away from the crowd. Thorne followed her there and stood for a moment, struggling with words. I'm sorry for what I did. I was an idiot. I didn't know. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. The words were delivered without heat, but they landed like a physical blow. Thorne's face reddened, and he looked down at the scarred wood of the bar. You're right. That's not an excuse. I was showing off, trying to be funny, and I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. He met her eyes. For what it's worth, you're a legend now. What you did catching that guy. Everyone's talking about it. I didn't do it for the talk. Ren poured him a drink without being asked, slid it across the bar. I did it because it needed to be done. That's the job. Is that why you stayed? Thorne asked quietly. Even after you were supposed to be dead. Some things you can't walk away from. Thorne picked up the drink but didn't drink it immediately. Just held it, turning the glass in his hands. To the quiet professionals. He raised the glass slightly, a toast to something he was only beginning to understand. Ren acknowledged it with the smallest nod, but she didn't drink. She never drank while working. Old habits ran too deep. Thorne returned to his booth where Calloway and Gann waited. The 3 of them sat in silence for a while, and Ren could feel them processing, trying to reconcile the woman who dropped Thorne to his knees, with the woman now calmly serving drinks like nothing had happened. That was the thing about being underestimated. Once people saw what you really were, they couldn't unsee it. The mask was gone forever. The door opened and Captain Hale walked in. He was out of uniform, wearing civilian clothes that made him look older somehow, more tired. He caught Ren's eye and moved to an empty stool at the far end of the bar. She finished serving a group of ensigns and made her way over. NCIS wants to debrief you. He said it without preamble, officially. They're talking about reinstatement, full rank, full honors. You'd be a hero. I'm not interested in going official. Hale's expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the frustration underneath. They want to give you everything back. Your rank, your record, your life. I already have a life, pouring drinks in a bar. Ren met his gaze steadily. Yes. They sat in silence for a moment. The bar noise swirled around them, but in their small bubble of space, everything felt very still. They want to reinstate you. Hale tried again. Full rank, full honors. You'd be a hero. I'm not a hero, Idris. I'm just someone who didn't die when I was supposed to. So what now? You just keep doing this. Keep serving people who used to disrespect you. Maybe. Ren's voice was quiet. Or maybe I keep doing what I've always done. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Make sure the people who think they're untouchable aren't. Hale studied her for a long moment. You know you could have asked for help. You didn't have to do this alone. Yes, I did. But maybe next time you won't. It wasn't a question. More like a hope. Ren considered it, then poured him a drink. Whiskey, neat. She remembered what he drank from his previous visits, from the 8 months of watching and cataloging and remembering details that seemed insignificant until they mattered. Maybe. That single word felt like a concession, and Hale seemed to understand its weight. He raised his glass slightly, another toast to things that couldn't be spoken aloud, and this time, Ren poured herself water and touched her glass to his. The gesture was small, but in its own way, it meant something. An acknowledgement. A possibility. Across town in the NCIS field office, Special Agent Mercer sat across an interrogation table from Paxton Oaks. He'd been in custody for a week, and in that time, his lawyer had advised him not to say anything. But lawyers could only do so much when the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing payments from Greystone Tactical, communications intercepts, the listening device with his fingerprints, and most damning, Marcus Teague's testimony. The sniper had been picked up at a private airfield trying to leave the country, and once he realized he was facing a murder charge, he'd started talking. Oaks had been the one to hire him. Oaks had provided the location for the meeting at Pier 7. Oaks had authorized the hit, and now, faced with a choice between life in prison and cooperation, Oaks was finally ready to talk. It started small. Mercer's voice was calm, almost conversational. Just a little extra money. That's what you told yourself, right? Oaks stared at the table. His expensive lawyer sat beside him, stone-faced and silent. They approached me 3 years ago. Before Yemen, said they needed someone on the inside, just information. Nothing that would hurt anyone. But it did hurt people. I didn't know they'd use it like that. Oaks's voice cracked slightly. The route was supposed to be secure. The intelligence said low threat. I thought I was just helping them avoid areas where they might have contractors operating. You gave them everything they needed to set up an ambush. Oaks's hands were shaking now. I didn't know. You have to believe me, I didn't know they'd kill anyone. 6 operators died, Commander. 6 people you served with. People who trusted you. The words hung in the air. Oaks looked up, and for the first time since his arrest, there was something human in his expression. Something that might have been genuine remorse. I know. His voice was barely a whisper. I know what I did. And I've lived with it every day since. Yet, you tried to kill the one person who survived? Mercer's tone hardened. Ren Castellan came back from the dead to find you, and instead of facing what you'd done, you tried to have her murdered. She was going to expose everything. Oaks looked defeated now, all the fight gone out of him. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't go to prison. So 6 deaths weren't enough. You needed a 7th. Oaks didn't answer. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Mercer leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me everything. Every contact you had with Greystone. Every piece of information you sold. Every person involved. And in exchange, instead of facing a firing squad for treason, you'll spend the rest of your life in a military prison. That's the deal. Take it or leave it. Oaks looked at his lawyer. The lawyer gave the smallest nod. I'll talk. And he did. For the next 6 hours, Oaks laid out the entire conspiracy. Names, dates, payments. A network of corruption that went deeper than anyone had suspected, reaching into logistics operations across multiple theaters. He wasn't the only one selling information. He was just one piece of a much larger machine. By the time the interrogation ended, Mercer had enough evidence to open investigations into a dozen other personnel. It would take years to unravel completely, but the foundation had been laid. As Oakes was led back to his cell, Mercer sat alone in the interrogation room and thought about Wren Castellan, about a woman who'd spent 3 years hunting the truth, who'd worked as a bartender and let people disrespect her, all for the chance to bring one traitor to justice. That kind of patience, that kind of dedication. It was rare. Mercer pulled out her phone and sent a message to Captain Hale. "Tell her we got everything, and tell her thank you." Back at the bar, Wren was wiping down the counter when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, saw Hale's message, and allowed herself the smallest smile. It's done, full confession, multiple other suspects identified. You were right about all of it. Mercer says thank you. Wren deleted the message and pocketed her phone. Around her, the bar continued its familiar rhythm, glasses clinking, voices rising and falling, the jukebox playing songs everyone had heard 1,000 times. This had been her world for 8 months, this small bubble of noise and motion and humanity. And in that time, she'd learned something important. Being invisible didn't mean being powerless. Sometimes the most effective operators were the ones nobody saw coming. Near closing time, Petty Officer Jessup approached the bar. He'd been coming in every few nights since the arrest, always sitting alone, always watching Wren with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "Can I ask you something?" He waited until she nodded. "Why did you stay? After you got what you came for, after Oakes was arrested. Why keep working here?" Wren considered the question. "Because this is where I figured it out. This place, these people, the ones who didn't see me." She gestured around the bar. "They taught me something important." "What's that?" "That most people only see what they expect to see. And sometimes that's the greatest advantage you can have." Jessup thought about that. "Is that what you're doing now? Staying invisible?" "I'm just pouring drinks." But the way she said it made it clear there was more to the story. There always was, with people like her. Jessup nodded slowly, understanding that some questions didn't have simple answers. "For what it's worth." He raised his glass. "I'm glad you made it back. From Yemen. From everything." Wren acknowledged the toast with a small nod. Then she moved on to the next customer, the next order, the next small task, in an endless series of small tasks that made up a shift. At midnight, the bar closed. The last customers filed out, including Thorne and his group, who nodded respectfully to Wren as they left. She locked the door behind them and spent the next hour cleaning, wiping down tables, stacking chairs, sweeping floors. The same routine she'd followed for 8 months. The same motions, repeated until they became meditation. When everything was clean, she stood in the empty bar and looked around. In the silence, with just the emergency lights casting long shadows, the place felt different, smaller, more intimate. This was where it had all started, where Thorne had grabbed her wrist, where the ring had been seen, where Captain Hale had saluted, where everything had changed. Wren pulled off the ring and held it up to the light. The gold caught the dim glow, the Trident engraving clearly visible. She'd worn it every day for 3 years. A reminder, a promise, a symbol of everything she'd lost and everything she was fighting to avenge. The promise was kept now. The mission was complete. She could take it off, put it away, move on. But as she stood there, feeling the weight of the metal against her palm, she realized something. The ring wasn't just about the past. It was about who she'd been. Who she still was, underneath all the disguises and covers and carefully constructed personas. She was Wren Castellan, call sign Revenant. A ghost who'd come back from the dead, not for glory or recognition, but for justice, for the truth, for the 6 people who couldn't speak for themselves anymore. That didn't change just because the mission was over. She slipped the ring back on her finger. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. Wren locked up the bar and walked to her car, the same beat-up sedan she'd been driving for 8 months. As she reached for the door handle, she paused and looked back at the building. Tomorrow, she'd be here again, pouring drinks, serving customers, being underestimated by people who'd never know what she really was. And maybe that was okay. Maybe being a quiet professional meant exactly that. Doing the work without needing the recognition. Standing up for what was right, even when nobody was watching. Being the person who didn't die when they were supposed to. And using that second chance to make sure others got their justice too. She got in the car and drove away, leaving the anchor and chain dark and empty behind her. The next morning, Wren received a call from Captain Hale. NCIS had finished their preliminary investigation and wanted to meet with her. Not for a debriefing, not for an interrogation. Just to talk. She agreed. The meeting took place in a conference room at the NCIS field office. Special Agent Mercer was there, along with 2 other agents Wren didn't recognize. Captain Hale sat in as a witness. Everyone was in civilian clothes, and the atmosphere was professional, but not hostile. Mercer opened a folder and spread several documents across the table. Thanks to your investigation, we've identified 12 other personnel with connections to the same network that recruited Oaks. It's going to take years to prosecute all of them, but we have enough evidence to start. Wren looked at the documents but didn't touch them. Good. We want to offer you something. Mercer leaned forward. Full reinstatement. Your rank restored. Back pay for the 3 years you were listed as KIA. And a position with JSOX doing exactly what you've been doing, finding corruption, rooting out traitors, using your skills for the mission. And if I say no, then you say no. Mercer's expression was carefully neutral. You've earned the right to choose your own path. But I hope you'll consider it. People like you, with your skills and dedication, we need more of them, not fewer. Wren was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Hale, who gave the smallest shrug. Your call? I need time to think about it. Mercer nodded. Take all the time you need. The offer stands. As Wren stood to leave, one of the other agents spoke up. Can I ask you something? Why did you wait so long? You could have come forward months ago, as soon as you had evidence against Oaks. Why wait until the video went viral? Because nobody would have believed me. Wren's voice was matter of fact. A dead operator making accusations against a respected officer. Without proof, without credibility, it would have been my word against his, and his word carried rank. But once the video showed who you really were, once people saw what you could do, that changed the equation. Exactly. The agent nodded slowly, understanding. That's why you let them disrespect you, why you stayed quiet for so long. You needed them to underestimate you right up until the moment it mattered most. Being invisible isn't weakness, Wren said quietly. Sometimes it's the strongest position you can take. She left the office and walked out into the morning sun. Behind her, she could hear Mercer and the other agents discussing the case, making plans, coordinating next steps, the machinery of justice grinding forward. But Wren's part in it was done, at least for now. That evening, she returned to the anchor and chain for her shift. The bar was moderately busy, nothing like the packed crowds of the previous week. The novelty was wearing off. Soon it would be back to normal, or as normal as things could be after everything that had happened. Wren moved through her routine with the same quiet efficiency, pouring drinks, clearing tables, making small talk when necessary, and staying silent when possible. The ring on her finger caught the light occasionally, but most people didn't notice it anymore. It had become just another part of her, unremarkable and easy to overlook. Midway through the shift, a young woman in navy dress blues approached the bar. She looked fresh out of training, maybe 22 or 23, with the kind of nervous energy that came from being new and wanting to prove yourself. Can I get a beer? Wren poured it and set it down. The woman paid and was about to leave when she hesitated. Are you really her? The seal from the video. Wren met her eyes. I'm just a bartender. But the young woman wasn't fooled. I enlisted because I wanted to serve, to be part of something bigger. But sometimes it's hard. People don't take you seriously. They see the uniform, but they don't see you. Wren understood that feeling better than the woman could possibly know. Keep doing the work. Don't worry about whether people see you or not. The work matters more than the recognition. Is that what you did? Every single day. The young woman nodded, absorbing this. Then she raised her beer slightly. To the quiet professionals. Wren acknowledged it with a nod and watched the woman return to her table. That small interaction, that brief moment of connection, felt more meaningful than any medal or commendation ever could. This was why she'd stayed, not for the glory or the vindication, but for moments like this, for the chance to show people that strength came in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was exactly what others expected you couldn't. At closing time, Wren went through her routine, cleaning, stacking, sweeping, the familiar rhythm that had become almost meditative over the past 8 months. As she wiped down the bar, Her phone buzzed. A message from Hale. "Made a decision yet," she typed back, still thinking. "Take your time, but for what it's worth, I think you'd be good at it. Finding the ones who need to be found, making sure justice gets served." Ren stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Maybe. But right now, I'm needed here, at a bar. At a place where people forget that everyone has a story, where a quiet bartender can be dismissed and overlooked, where someone like me can make a difference just by showing up and doing the work." There was a long pause before Hale's response came through. "I understand. And Ren, for what it's worth, you're one of the best operators I've ever known. Dead or alive." She smiled at that. "Thanks, Idris." She finished cleaning and locked up. Outside, the base was quiet, most personnel already asleep or heading that direction. Ren stood in the parking lot for a moment, looking up at the stars barely visible through the light pollution. 3 years ago, she'd been declared dead. 3 years ago, she'd lost everything: her team, her identity, her place in the world. And she'd spent those 3 years hunting for answers, driven by a need for justice that consumed everything else. Now, the hunt was over. The traitor was caught. The truth was known. And she was still standing, still breathing, still herself. The ring on her finger caught the distant light, the trident barely visible in the darkness. She touched it briefly, a reminder of everything it represented. The people who died, the mission that had gone wrong, the promise she'd made to find the truth. She'd kept that promise. Now it was time to figure out what came next. Ren got in her car and drove away from the base, heading toward the motel where she'd been staying. But halfway there, she changed direction. Drove instead to the waterfront, to a quiet pier where she could sit and watch the waves and think. The water was calm tonight, reflecting the lights from the distant shore. She sat on a bench and let the rhythm of the waves wash over her, soothing and constant. For 3 years, she'd been a ghost, revenant, someone who'd come back from the dead with a mission. But maybe it was time to stop being a ghost. Maybe it was time to be Ren Castellan again, whatever that meant now. She pulled out her phone and looked at Mercer's offer one more time, full reinstatement, a position hunting corruption, a chance to use her skills for something bigger. It was tempting, more tempting than she'd expected. But there was something else pulling at her too. The young sailor tonight, asking if she was really her. The way Thorne had apologized, genuinely remorseful. The respect in Jessup's eyes when he'd toasted the quiet professionals. Those moments mattered, not because they were grand or dramatic, but because they were real. Because in those moments, she wasn't a legend or a ghost or a call sign. She was just a person showing other people that strength came in unexpected forms. Maybe both paths were possible. Maybe she could accept Mercer's offer and still work at the bar. Maybe she could be Revenant when the mission called and Ren the rest of the time. Maybe she didn't have to choose. She stood and walked back to her car. Tomorrow she'd call Mercer and discuss the details. Tonight, she just wanted to sit with the quiet and let herself feel the weight of everything that had happened. The hunt was over. Justice had been served. 6 ghosts could finally rest. And Ren Castellan, who'd been dead for 3 years, was finally ready to live again. As she drove back toward the motel, she passed the Anchor and Chain one more time. The building was dark, windows reflecting the streetlights, looking exactly like what it was, just a bar. Nothing special, nothing remarkable, but Ren knew better. She knew that sometimes the most important battles were fought in the quietest places, that sometimes the greatest victories came from people nobody expected, that sometimes being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all. She touched the ring on her finger one last time and made herself a new promise. Whatever came next, whoever she became, she'd never forget this. Never forget what it felt like to be invisible. Never forget the power that came from being overlooked. Because the world needed quiet professionals. People who did the work without needing recognition. People who stood up for what was right, even when nobody was watching. People like her. The road stretched out ahead, full of possibilities and choices and paths not yet taken. Ren drove forward into that uncertain future, carrying with her everything she'd learned and everyone she'd lost. The ring glinted in the dashboard light, a reminder, a symbol, a promise kept and a promise yet to be made. She was Revenant. She was Ren Castellan. She was both and neither and everything in between. and she was exactly where she needed to be. Have you ever had to fight for recognition or found strength in being underestimated? Your story matters. Share it in the comments below. And if this journey meant something to you, consider subscribing. There are more stories of quiet courage waiting to be told, and I'd be honored to share them with you.